For 6 years, I genuinely believed Violet was the person I was meant to spend my life with. Our marriage was steady, perhaps not filled with grand passion, but strong and reliable. Together, we built a family, raising 3 children, including a set of twins who quickly became the center of our world. Our home stood in a quiet suburban neighborhood, lined with neat lawns and towering trees, a place that felt safe, almost untouchable. Looking back on those years now, there's a bittersweetness to the memories. The peaceful nights, the comforting routine, it all created the illusion of security, a belief that our little bubble could never burst. Evenings were filled with warmth and laughter. The sound of the twins cooing from their cribs blended with the delighted squeals of our eldest as he wobbled around, determined to take another step. No matter how chaotic the day had been, walking through the front door to see Violet's bright smile always felt like coming home. She would wrap her arms around me, sometimes teasingly complaining about the whirlwind of dinner or the never-ending pile of diapers. It was simple. It was good. So good that I never once considered how quickly it could all unravel. But it did. It all started with one choice, one decision Violet made entirely on her own without so much as a discussion. That single act sent cracks through our marriage so deep that they could never be repaired. The moment shattered everything we had, leaving behind only anger, betrayal, and a relentless desire for justice. If someone had told me back then that Violet's loyalty was fragile, I would have dismissed the idea without hesitation. But the truth is, loyalty disappears the moment someone decides their partner no longer has a say in their life. The night she told me, I can recall every detail as if it were burned into my memory. Her twin sister, Gianna, and Gianna's husband, Jason, had struggled for years to have a child. They had exhausted every option only to be told that surrogacy was their last hope. Violet had made up her mind without a word to me that she would be the one to carry their baby. And the worst part? It wasn't just the decision itself. It was the fact that she had already put everything into motion behind my back as if my opinion was nothing more than an afterthought. That night, we sat on the couch, though we weren't really together. We were just 2 people occupying the same space, each lost in our own world. The dim glow of the television flickered, playing a late-night comedy that neither of us was actually watching. Then, with unsettling nonchalance, Violet glanced over at me, her phone in hand, and spoke words that sent a chill down my spine. "Daniel, there's something I've decided to do." That tone. I knew it well. It was the voice she used when she had already made up her mind, when my thoughts wouldn't change a thing. I muted the TV and turned to face her. "You look serious. What's going on?" She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear before answering. "I'm going to be Gianna's surrogate." I blinked, certain I had misheard. "What do you mean?" Holding my gaze, she repeated, unwavering, "Gianna can't have a baby. She's been through multiple rounds of IVF and none of them worked. Their doctor recommended surrogacy, and since Gianna and I have the same DNA, I'm the perfect choice. I've already spoken to the clinic." For a moment I almost laughed, expecting her to say she was joking. But there was no humor in her expression. My pulse pounded in my ears. "You've already..." "Violet, are you telling me you're carrying Jason's child?" She exhaled slowly. "It's Gianna and Jason's baby," she corrected, as if that made a difference. "Genetically, it's their embryo. I'm just the carrier." My jaw tightened. "And when, exactly, did you decide all of this?" "Without talking to me." Lifting her chin, she met my question with defiance. "I knew you'd react this way. I made this decision because Gianna is my twin and I can't stand to watch her suffer. Jason and I discussed it in detail, and I know it's the right thing to do." A sharp heat rose to my face. "Jason, and you talked about it in detail?" I repeated, my anger curling inside me like a slow-burning fuse. "That's great. Meanwhile, I'm your husband and I'm the last to know. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel?" Frustration flared in her eyes. "Daniel, I'm sorry, but this is my body. I'm doing this whether you approve or not. I hoped you'd support me. And yeah, maybe I should have told you sooner, but I knew you'd try to talk me out of it, and this is too important." For a moment I was silent, my throat tightening with a rage so intense it physically hurt. "So that's it," I finally managed, my voice strained. "You expect me to just accept this? To sit by while you carry another man's child under our roof? And you think I'll be fine with it?" Violet set her phone down, crossing her arms. "Call it whatever you want. But this is happening. Gianna and Jason are counting on me. And if you really love me, you'll respect that." A cold calm settled over me, far more dangerous than open fury. "Respect?" I repeated, my voice quiet but firm. "Respect isn't making life-altering decisions behind your husband's back. This isn't just about you, Violet. This affects our marriage. Our family." She stood, her fists clenched. Stop acting like the victim. Gianna is part of my family too, and I'm supporting her. If you can't understand that, then maybe I've given you more credit than you deserved all these years. That was it, the remark that sent me over the edge. Overestimated me. Slowly, I rose to my feet. Violet, if you go through with this, it will destroy us. She didn't waver, didn't show a hint of hesitation. Instead, she walked past me, her posture rigid with resolve. Then maybe we were never as strong as I thought. I stood there, frozen, my whole body trembling with frustration. My heart pounded so forcefully that it drowned out every other sound around me. I tried to steady my breath, to force myself to think clearly, but the weight of her betrayal settled over me like a suffocating shroud. The house felt eerily silent, heavy with the aftermath of her words. I kept telling myself to stay calm, to approach this rationally, but deep down I already knew the truth. Everything had changed. The days that followed were unbearable. Violet spoke openly about doctor's appointments, hormone treatments, and implantation schedules as if she were planning a routine grocery run, completely oblivious to the damage she was causing. Every word that left her mouth was like a fresh wound, reinforcing the harsh reality I couldn't ignore. She had made her decision, and it wasn't me. Any sense of unity between us had completely crumbled. 2 nights after she had dropped the bombshell, I came home to find a box from a fertility clinic sitting in our fridge. The kitchen table was cluttered with vials of medication, syringes, and stacks of medical instructions. Violet sat at the table, casually flipping through a thick packet of paperwork, as if she were browsing a cookbook. "What is all this?" I demanded, gesturing at the mess. Without lifting her eyes, she replied in a flat tone, "Hormone treatments. I need to start them to prepare for the embryo transfer. The clinic sent them earlier than expected." I stared at her, a sharp twist of disbelief cutting through me. "And you didn't think this was something we should discuss first?" She merely shrugged. "I already told you. I'm doing this. There's nothing left to discuss." My voice came out low and tense. "So you're just completely disregarding my feelings? You don't care that you're pushing me away?" She rolled her eyes, exhaling sharply. "Oh, stop being dramatic, Daniel. It's just 9 months. I'll carry the baby, give it to Gianna, and we'll move on. This isn't replacing our children with another. I'm doing this for my sister." I shook my head, frustration clawing at my patience. "You can rationalize it however you want, but if you go through with this, I swear, I won't stay in this marriage." For the first time, she looked up at me. Her expression was cool, unyielding. "You're free to leave if your pride can't handle my decision." A surge of heat burned through my chest. "Pride? This has nothing to do with pride, Violet. It's about trust, about partnership. You blindsided me completely. You made plans with Jason, finalized everything, and now I'm just expected to accept it." She lifted her chin, her voice sharp. "So what if I talk to Jason? He's the biological father. He needed to be involved in the discussion." I let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "And I'm your husband, the man you made vows with. Or does that not matter anymore?" Violet didn't even flinch. She simply picked up the papers again, flipping through them as if the conversation was already over. "We're done here, Daniel." She didn't see the destruction she was leaving in her wake, or worse, she simply didn't care. My fingers twitched with the urge to grab the documents, to tear them apart, to force her to acknowledge what she was throwing away. But I knew how that would look, like I had lost control, like I was the unreasonable one. So instead, I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving her with her latest project and trying to steady my breath. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I made a silent decision. If Violet was determined to walk this path alone, then I wouldn't stand in her way. I would file for divorce, because no matter how I tried to justify it, there was no way I could stay married to a woman who was about to carry Jason's child. It didn't take long for Violet to find out. The moment she heard I had contacted a lawyer, she stormed into the living room, where I was helping our oldest with homework. Her fury was palpable, radiating off her in waves. "How dare you?" she hissed, voice low so our child wouldn't overhear. I calmly set down the crayon I was holding, told our kid to stay put, and led Violet into the hallway. Lower your voice, I warned. I don't want the kids hearing this. Her glare was sharp enough to cut through steel. So you think it's completely acceptable to go behind my back and start divorce proceedings? My chest tightened, but I kept my voice steady. I told you what would happen if you went through with this. You made your choice. I'm done being ignored. Tears welled in her eyes, but not from sadness. They were the kind of tears fueled by anger. Daniel, we can fix this. You just need to accept it and then we move forward. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. No, Violet. You're not listening. There is no fixing this. You betrayed my trust, used our shared finances, and arranged a surrogacy as if our marriage were an afterthought. What exactly did you expect me to say? Sure, honey, that sounds great. Her lips trembled, her confidence wavering for the first time. I didn't think it would come to this, she admitted, her voice cracking slightly. I let out a hollow chuckle. Maybe I am cold now. But I wasn't before you made that choice. That's what turned me into this. Violet opened her mouth as if to argue but quickly shut it again. Whatever words she wanted to throw at me, she couldn't seem to find them. Instead, she spun around and stomped upstairs, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding as I wished, just for a moment, that this was all some terrible dream. The law in our state required a full year of separation before a divorce could be finalized. Violet knew this and used it to her advantage. She refused to move out, insisting she had nowhere else to go, that she needed rest, that the children deserved stability. I didn't want to uproot them either, so I tolerated her presence. Though calling it tolerating was probably generous. Most nights she slept in the guest room. Other times she curled up on the couch. I stayed in the master bedroom and we moved through the house like strangers, barely acknowledging each other. The tension was suffocating, lingering in every corner of the home. And, of course, the children noticed. They asked why their mother and I no longer sat together at dinner, why things felt different. We tried to keep things civil in front of them, but the truth seeped through no matter how much we tried to contain it. Then one weekend Gianna arrived. And she wasn't alone. Jason was with her. I found them in the living room, flipping through a baby catalog like they owned the place. The kids were outside playing, which meant I had no reason to pretend to be polite. Jason awkwardly stood from my recliner, clearing his throat. Daniel, hey. We were just, making some plans for the baby. Violet rubbed her belly, which had just started to show. Jason and Gianna want to make sure we're prepared. I need a few things in the house to stay comfortable. I narrowed my eyes. Why can't Jason buy everything for his own house? You know, since that's where the baby is actually going to live. Jason let out a nervous chuckle. Well, we thought it'd be a good idea to have some essentials here too, since Violet's carrying. I cut him off. Don't talk about supplies like my home is some kind of baby lounge. Violet's expression darkened, her frustration evident. You're being completely unreasonable. Do you expect me to sit around at their place for hours if I need to rest? She lifted her chin defiantly. I live here, Daniel. My jaw tightened. Yeah, you do. But maybe Jason and Gianna should stop treating my house like a maternity ward. Jason shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Gianna. She stood with her arms crossed, her gaze sharp. Daniel, it's not like we enjoy being here. We're just trying to make this easier for Violet. I felt something inside me snap. Let me guess. You expect me to just go along with this? Maybe pamper Violet, fetch her snacks at midnight, and play the perfect husband for a baby that isn't even mine. Gianna threw up her hands in exasperation. For heaven's sake, we're family. This shouldn't be about yours or mine, it's about supporting each other. I met her gaze with an icy stare. It stopped being about family the moment you two made this decision behind my back. Jason sighed. Look, man, I know this is awkward. That doesn't even begin to cover it, I interrupted. If you're so worried about Violet, then set up everything she needs at your place. Buy every single thing in that catalog. But don't do it here. I took a step closer. And if you keep showing up unannounced, we're going to have a serious problem. Violet's glare was sharp. You can't just ban them from the house. This is my home too. I turned to her, my voice like ice. Maybe you should have thought about that before you chose to share this pregnancy with them instead of with your husband. The room was heavy with tension. The kind that pressed down on your chest and made it hard to breathe. Finally, Gianna grabbed Jason's arm. Let's go. Just like that, they left. But the damage? It was already done. The door had barely shut when Violet spun toward me, her finger jabbing the air. You're acting like a child. I hope you realize you're pushing away the kids, aunt and uncle. I shrugged. I'd rather distance myself from them than let them walk in here like my marriage never mattered. She huffed in frustration before storming off. leaving me alone with the simmering anger that had become my constant companion. The months that followed settled into a miserable routine. Violet's pregnancy progressed, whether I acknowledged it or not. She dealt with morning sickness, backaches, exhaustion, everything that came with carrying a child. And she still expected me to care. "Daniel, could you grab me some crackers from the kitchen? Or, can you get me a pillow for my back?" Each time, my response was the same. The silence between us was cold and deliberate, an unspoken battle neither of us was willing to surrender. Her frustration simmered beneath the surface, growing stronger with each passing day. One evening, unable to hold back any longer, she snapped. "What kind of heartless man are you?" She spat, her voice laced with anger. "You can sit there and watch the mother of your children struggle, and not even lift a single finger to help." I didn't bother looking up. My response was curt, dismissive. "You're Jason's surrogate. Let him handle it. Or better yet, call Gianna." I waved a hand, signaling the conversation was over. "I have my own priorities, raising our kids and keeping this house running." She would storm off in frustration, often in tears, muttering about how cruel I had become. But every tear she shed bounced off the hardened shell around my heart. I reminded myself that when she made her decision, she hadn't spared a single tear for me. Compassion was something she had denied me, and I saw no reason to offer it in return. She attempted to break through my walls, to stir the guilt she thought must still exist somewhere inside me. Late one night, she appeared at my doorway, her expression a mix of desperation and quiet hope. "I can't sleep," she murmured. "My legs keep cramping. Could you rub them? Like you did when I was pregnant with the twins?" I studied her for a long moment before responding flatly, "No." Then, without another word, I shut the door in her face. The growing tension in the house didn't go unnoticed. Our eldest, with his small voice and wide, innocent eyes, approached me one day. "Dad, why don't you hug Mom anymore?" His question struck deeper than I cared to admit. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat and forced my voice to remain gentle. "Sometimes grown-ups don't get along, buddy," I told him. "But I love you, and I will always be here for you." The look in his eyes twisted my stomach. It made me want to confront Jason, to make him answer for what he had done to our family. But more than that, it fueled my resentment toward Violet, for allowing it all to happen. As the months dragged on, her family began inserting themselves into the situation. One evening, her mother called, her voice dripping with disapproval. "Daniel, I can't believe how selfish you're being. Violet is doing something incredibly selfless for her sister. How can you refuse to support her?" I kept my tone cold, unyielding. "Maybe ask your daughter why she didn't think it was important to discuss this decision with her husband first. I owe her nothing. That baby isn't mine." Her father took a different approach, opting for intimidation instead. His voice was gruff, edged with warning. "Young man, you're heading down a dark path. If you don't start supporting Violet, we'll make sure you regret it." I smirked, unimpressed. "That's funny. I already regret trusting your daughter with my marriage. Good luck with your threats." Then I hung up. I knew they saw me as the villain, but I didn't care. The law was on my side. Violet had made a choice, one that used our shared finances, one that affected our marriage without my consent. That was on her, not me. One of the worst confrontations happened in the 7th month. Violet returned from the store, her belly now heavy, struggling to carry the grocery bags up the porch steps. One bag nearly slipped from her grasp. "Daniel, can you please help me?" she called out, breathless. "My back is killing me." I stood in the doorway, arms folded. "Ask Jason or Gianna," I said coolly. "They're the reason you're pregnant." Her eyes shimmered, though I could see a flicker of anger behind the tears. "I just spent hours at the hospital for checkups. I'm exhausted. I'm still your wife, whether you like it or not." A dry, humorless chuckle escaped me. "Not for long, and certainly not in spirit. You made that clear." She let out a frustrated wail and turned, dragging the bags inside on her own. A few cans tumbled out, rolling across the porch. I didn't move to help. She struggled, bruising her arm as she wrestled everything inside, her breath coming in ragged gasps. When she finally set the bags on the counter, she spun to face me, her eyes blazing. "You can't keep punishing me like this," she snapped. I raised an eyebrow. "I'm not punishing you. I'm just not playing the role of the supportive husband you so easily discarded." Her hand went to her belly, her face streaked with tears. "When this baby is born, you're going to regret being this cruel." I let out a short, empty laugh. "Believe me, I won't. Because once the baby is here, you'll be gone and this whole mess will be out of my life." She sucked in a sharp breath as if my words had physically struck her. Then, without another word, she turned and stormed off to the guest room, slamming the door behind her. The house fell into an eerie silence. For a brief moment I exhaled, wondering if I had finally gone too far. But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself Violet made her choice. She had shattered our marriage for this. And I wasn't about to forget it. Then came the night that changed everything. Violet went into labor earlier than expected, weeks before her due date. It was past midnight when a sharp, agonized moan echoed down the hallway. Then, frantic knocking at my bedroom door. "Daniel," she cried, her voice thick with panic. "My water broke, oh God, the contractions are coming fast. Please, I need help." I threw open the door to find her gripping the frame, her face contorted in pain. Sweat clung to her forehead, her hands cradling her swollen belly. For a brief moment, a memory surfaced, her hand gripping mine as she fought through labor with our twins, my voice murmuring words of comfort. But that fleeting recollection was quickly smothered by months of built-up resentment. I fixed her with a cold stare, my tone devoid of warmth. "I'm not taking you to the hospital. That's Jason's responsibility." Her eyes widened, disbelief shadowing her expression. "Jason isn't picking up. Gianna's phone keeps going straight to voicemail. I need to get there now." I merely shrugged. "Then call an ambulance." A contraction tore through her, making her clutch the doorframe for support, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. Tears welled in her eyes as she pleaded, "Daniel, please. You can't just leave me like this." I met her gaze, unwavering. "Watch me." She staggered, pain and anguish distorting her face. You're heartless." I gave a slow, deliberate nod. "That's what happens when your feelings are ignored." With that, I turned and stepped back into my room. "Good luck with the baby," I added before shutting the door. From the hallway, a quiet sob broke the silence, followed by the sounds of her fumbling, presumably dialing emergency services. 15 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed outside my window. I heard the urgent voices of paramedics as they worked swiftly to transport her. A fleeting pang of guilt gnawed at the edges of my mind, but I forced it down. She had made her choices, ones that had shattered our marriage. Why should I rush to help when the child she was carrying had nothing to do with me? The next morning, my phone erupted with calls. Violet's mother left a string of furious voicemails, her accusations cutting like shards of glass. She raged about how I had abandoned Violet in her most vulnerable moment, calling me cruel and devoid of compassion. I deleted them all, not bothering to listen beyond the first few seconds. Violet had wanted this child for her sister. That was her decision. Let her rely on them now. She and the baby remained in the hospital for several days. The infant, a girl, had arrived prematurely but was stable. Gianna, however, faced complications, leaving Jason stretched thin as he moved between their hospital rooms. Meanwhile, I carried on as usual, taking the twins to school, going to work, making dinner. When Violet's mother called to inform me that her discharge was approaching, I simply replied, "That's her choice," and ended the call. I was in the living room reading when Violet finally returned. She looked utterly drained, her skin pale, dark circles shadowing her eyes. At her feet, in a portable car seat, the newborn stirred before letting out a soft cry. With a weary sigh, Violet sank onto the couch. I eyed the infant, a small, fragile reminder of everything that had driven a wedge through our marriage. My voice was clipped. "Why are you here with the baby? Shouldn't she be with Gianna?" Violet exhaled slowly, closing her eyes for a moment before answering. "Gianna is still in the hospital. Jason's overwhelmed. They asked me to keep the baby for a few weeks." I let out a dry laugh. "They asked? Or you volunteered?" Her expression hardened. "Does it matter? She's helpless. I couldn't just abandon her." I shook my head, my tone turning colder. "You should have thought about that before you decided to be a surrogate. But let's make one thing clear, I won't be helping. If you're too exhausted to deal with the crying, that's on you." Violet pressed a hand to her forehead, her shoulders sagging. A single tear slipped down her cheek. "Have you always been this cruel?" she murmured, more to herself than to me, "or did I turn you into this?" I shrugged. "That's something to reflect on when you're up all night with a screaming baby." Without another word, I turned away. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have real children to feed. She flinched as if I had struck her, but she said nothing as I walked into the kitchen to start dinner. For the next month, the baby's cries filled the house. Violet dragged herself through sleepless nights, barely functioning. I would hear her in the hall, trying to warm bottles, desperately attempting to comfort a child that wasn't hers to keep. More than once, she approached me, her face hollow with exhaustion. One night, with tears dripping onto the bottle she held, her voice trembled. Please, she begged. I just need half an hour to lie down. She's been crying for hours. I met her gaze, unmoved. Call Jason. Or your mother. A choked sob escaped her lips as she turned away, rocking the baby while its cries echoed through the house. I felt a twinge of pity, not for Violet, but for the child. She hadn't asked to be caught in this situation. But my sympathy never extended to my wife. She had made her decisions, and I had no intention of letting her escape the consequences. Her parents, however, had different ideas. They visited frequently, berating me, pointing accusing fingers in my face. Monster. Coward. A failure of a husband. Violet's father took a more direct approach. One afternoon, as I stood in the kitchen, he stepped in front of me, his voice low with warning. Listen here, he growled. Violet just gave birth. She's postpartum. She needed assistance, but I refused to be the one to provide it. You can't just leave her like this, he argued, his gaze sharp with disapproval. I met his glare steadily, unwavering. She should have considered the consequences before she ignored my boundaries, I responded coolly. Let Jason take responsibility for the baby. Let your family deal with it. It's not my child, so it's not my concern. His face flushed with frustration. Muttering under his breath, he turned and stormed out, though I knew the silent judgment wouldn't stop. It didn't matter. Let them think of me as heartless. However, the court had a different perspective. As the divorce proceedings inched forward, my lawyer presented compelling evidence, proof that Violet had withdrawn money from our joint accounts to fund her surrogacy efforts, even going so far as to forge my signature at times. The court documents laid it all out clearly, her deception, her complete disregard for my refusal, and her financial manipulation. The judge particularly frowned upon the forgery. Violet's lawyer attempted to paint me as a cruel husband who abandoned his pregnant wife. But since the child was not mine, and Violet had deliberately hidden her surrogacy plans, that argument lacked weight. Ironically, Gianna and Jason had nothing to say when the financial details surfaced, perhaps relieved that it wasn't their bank accounts that had been drained. They got their baby, and that was all that mattered to them. But with Gianna still in recovery and Jason juggling multiple responsibilities, they weren't in a position to assume full custody immediately. As a result, the baby remained in my house, a strange, tension-filled arrangement that none of us wanted but had no choice but to endure. By the time the final hearing approached, Violet had physically recovered, but emotionally, she was unraveling under the pressure of caring for a child she wouldn't be keeping. 2 weeks before the court date, she confronted me in the living room. The baby, asleep in a bassinet nearby, remained blissfully unaware of the tension between us. Crossing her arms, Violet spoke bluntly. I need financial help. Barely glancing up from my laptop, I asked for what. She hesitated, then lifted her chin in defiance. My doctor says I need to focus on postpartum recovery. I shouldn't have to find a job right away. I arched an eyebrow. You're not my responsibility anymore, Violet. Her lips tightened. I'm still the mother of your 3 children, she snapped. I'm not asking for money related to the surrogacy. I mean for myself, to live, to provide for our kids when they're with me, to cover my share of expenses. Closing my laptop, I met her gaze steadily. When the divorce is finalized, I'll pay child support. That's required by law. But spousal support? That's not happening. Her eyes darkened with frustration. I deserve financial security. I sacrificed my body and my comfort for your sister. She choked out. I cut her off before she could say more. Not for me. And that's the difference. Her voice trembled. You're unbelievably cruel. You don't even care that I'm struggling with postpartum depression. I remained firm. I care about our children, but I don't owe Jason's baby anything. And the postpartum struggles? Those were the consequences of your own choices, Violet. You made this decision. Now you have to live with it. Her lips pressed together, and tears welled in her eyes. You'll regret this, she whispered, her voice trembling between anger and sorrow. I shook my head. You've said that before. The only real regret here is that any of this happened in the first place. She swallowed hard, briefly glancing at the peacefully sleeping infant. Daniel, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. It hurts me to say this, but you're not the man I remember. I let out a bitter chuckle. And you're not the woman I married. Life changes, Violet. Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the silence. The baby remained undisturbed, blissfully unaware of the chaos surrounding it. In the final week leading up to the court date, Violet decided to move out. She took the baby to her mother's house, planning to keep it there until Gianna was well enough to assume custody. She packed in a hurry, stuffing her belongings into boxes with shaking hands. The realization of everything finally sinking in, she silently wept as she folded her clothes. Our children, confused and uncertain, hesitated before asking, "Is Mom leaving for good?" Violet knelt before them, her expression strained but gentle. Forcing a shaky smile, she reassured them, "I'll still see you often. I love you so much." They nodded, though I could see the weight of sadness in their small faces. The day she left, she stood in the foyer, a small suitcase in one hand and the baby carrier at her feet. Her eyes, red from crying, met mine for what felt like the last time. Her voice was fragile as she pleaded, "Daniel, please don't do this. Don't finalize the divorce. I can fix things. Just give me a chance." For the first time in a long while, I felt a strange pull in my chest. But I let it pass. Fix things how, Violet? By turning back time? Because that's the only way. A single tear rolled down her cheek. "I never imagined I'd lose you. I just wanted to help Gianna." I nodded, my expression unreadable. "Well, you helped her. And in the process, you destroyed our marriage." Her breath hitched. Without another word, she picked up the baby carrier and turned, walking out the door. The door clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing faintly through the empty house. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly, my breath uneven. For the first time, a sense of relief settled over me. At the final court hearing, Violet and her attorney sat at one table, while I occupied another with my own legal counsel. In the gallery, Jason and Gianna sat stiffly, their faces etched with discomfort. The judge, a stern woman with an unwavering expression, carefully reviewed the documents before her. Violet's lawyer painted a sorrowful image, a woman abandoned during pregnancy, a husband who had emotionally neglected her, refusing to offer support. But the facts spoke louder. My attorney laid them out with precision. Violet had chosen surrogacy without my consent. She had used our shared finances to fund the procedure. She had gone so far as to forge my signature. From the beginning, I had been clear about my stance, but she had disregarded it completely. When the judge finally spoke, her voice was firm, leaving no room for doubt. Violet's actions had shown blatant disregard for our marriage. Since the child was not biologically mine, I bore no financial or parental responsibility. As for spousal support, the judge ruled against it, given how Violet had misused our funds. Then came the final, devastating decision. I was granted primary custody of our 3 children. Violet was denied visitation rights unless she could demonstrate a stable living situation. Additionally, she was ordered to repay a portion of the marital funds she had wrongfully spent. As the judge's ruling echoed through the courtroom, Violet's face crumpled. Tears spilled down her cheeks, her hand covering her mouth as her shoulders shook. Jason and Gianna exchanged uncertain glances, regret darkening their expressions. My heartbeat pounded in my chest, but beneath it all, I felt a sense of validation. The law had sided with me. I had walked away from a betrayal, and the justice system had confirmed my right to do so. Outside the courtroom, Violet approached me, her eyes swollen and red from crying. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Daniel," she whispered, barely holding herself together. "I never wanted this to happen. I'm sorry. I really am. I made a mistake, but I never imagined you'd shut me out like this." I studied her, recalling all the times I had pleaded with her, the countless moments she had dismissed me, the unwavering conviction in her voice when she insisted it was her body, her decision. "This wasn't just a mistake," I replied, my voice steady. "You put Jason and Gianna's needs ahead of ours. You deceived me, and that broke everything between us." She exhaled shakily. I just wish you could forgive me someday. My expression didn't change. You forged my signature. You ignored me when I begged you not to do this. Forgiveness isn't something you can demand so easily. I took a breath, then added, goodbye, Violet. At that moment, Gianna stepped forward, reaching toward me. Daniel, don't you see? She said urgently. She regrets it. She did this for me. I pulled my arm away before she could touch me. You got what you wanted, Gianna. That baby is yours now. You and Jason can deal with everything that comes with it. If you believe Violet deserves your support, then give it to her. But I'm finished. They stood in silence as I turned and walked away. The corridor ahead seemed brighter, lighter, like a weight I had carried for too long had finally lifted. In the weeks following the final ruling, Violet moved in with her mother, taking the baby with her while Gianna recovered. Whenever we met for custody exchanges, Violet appeared drained, a shadow of the person she once was. She would ask about the kids and I would answer politely but nothing more. She often looked at me as if hoping for a flicker of warmth, some sign of reconciliation. I never gave her one. Eventually, Jason and Gianna assumed full custody of the child, but their lives did not unfold as they had envisioned. Jason's work hours were reduced, tightening their finances. Gianna's medical expenses continued to mount, leaving them struggling under the weight of debt. Meanwhile, Violet, financially depleted, found it difficult to secure a stable job. On the other hand, my children flourished. Without the constant tension in the household, our lives settled into a steady, peaceful rhythm: school days, weekend outings, quiet movie nights. There were no more sleepless nights from a crying infant, no more unspoken conflicts lingering in the hallways. Every so often, Violet would send a message or an email not about our children, but about regret. She admitted she had miscalculated everything. She had failed to foresee Jason's instability, Gianna's continuing health issues. In the end, the surrogacy had not helped anyone, it had only brought more turmoil. My responses remained minimal, polite. I only engaged when it concerned our kids. One evening, while building a tower out of Legos, my oldest child looked up at me. Dad, do you still love Mom? I hesitated before kneeling beside them. I care about her because she's your mother, I said gently. But sometimes people break trust. And when that happens, things change. They seemed to accept the answer without hesitation, returning to their colorful bricks as if the matter had been settled. Children have a way of seeing things clearly, direct, without pretense. It's one of the reasons I love them so fiercely. Months passed, turning into a year. The divorce became just another chapter in the past. I had my home, my job, and full custody of my children. Violet drifted in and out of their lives, never fully finding her footing again. People would sometimes ask me, why didn't you help her? It was obvious she was overwhelmed. People would ask me, and my response remained the same: she made a choice that deliberately left me out, and she had to face the fallout of her decision. Their disapproving shakes of the head and accusations of being merciless never fazed me. Perhaps they were right. But a marriage should be founded on respect and honesty, two things Violet had blatantly disregarded. In the end, my revenge wasn't loud or dramatic. There was no anger, no outburst. It was simply stepping back and allowing Violet to bear the full weight of her actions alone. If that made me heartless in their eyes, so be it. Maintaining my dignity came at a cost, and if that price was being seen as cruel, I had no hesitation in paying it. Subscribe and stay ahead of those who deceive. And trust me, the next story will make this one seem like nothing more than a bedtime tale.